and still others that we are not human persons with human rights until 3 months after birth, or even after 6 months after birth. There was a paper on infanticide published in Oxford just a few months ago by Professor Savulescu, who's Professor of Ethics at Oxford University. And it was openly discussing the idea that a baby wasn't a person until it was 6 months old, I think it was. And he ferociously defended the right of his magazine to publish an article which for many people would just seem horrendous. The Universal Bill of Human Rights makes it clear that distinctions regarding number of weeks or months at which a human being becomes a person are not to be countenanced as a basis for determining what rights are to be protected. Everyone has the right everywhere to recognition as a person before the law, is what the Universal Declaration says, and everyone means every member of the human family, which necessarily includes the unborn. Now, I spoke earlier about the dishonest appeal to reasonable public concerns about maternal mortality and backstreet abortions. Now, in all jurisdictions where abortion has been legalised, abortion advocates have invented data about the numbers of so-called backstreet abortions said to be going on despite the law. And examples include the United States of America and Britain. The former abortionist Bernard Nathanson admitted in his book, Aborting America, and I quote, "We claimed that between 5,000 and 10,000 women a year died of botched abortions." And he said the actual figure was closer to 200 to 300. We were guilty of massive deception. In developed countries, the number of women dying from abortion started to fall significantly in the decades before abortion was liberalised. Numbers in England and Wales fell from 96 deaths in 1950 to 56 deaths in 1960 and 32 deaths in 1970, 3 years after the legalisation of abortion in Britain. Medical advances have been the most important factor in this trend. After the British Abortion Act was implemented in 1968, the overall trend in the number of women dying from all causes in their main childbearing years continued. And it continued a steady decrease, which was already in evidence. In other words, there was no sudden marked decline in women's deaths which could be attributed to the passage of the British Abortion Act, which you would have thought there would be if our opponents had been telling the truth. Pro-abortionists have repeatedly and continue to exaggerate several times over the probable number of illegal abortions in Britain before 1967. In 1966, the Council of the Royal College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists showed that in 1962, approximately 14,600 women in England and Wales had received hospital treatment for the consequences of criminal abortion. And the RCOG commented, it's been repeatedly stated that as many as 100,000 are induced in this country each year illegally, and a more recent estimate says 250,000. They said these, and an earlier figure of 50,000, are without any secure factual foundation of which we are aware. The same pattern of exaggerations characterised campaigns for legalised abortion all over the world. I remember, it's about 30 years ago now, there was a letter in the Times, there was an article in the Times newspaper in London, and it was reported on the BBC and the ITN News and so on at that time, that there were 2,000 women dying each year from illegal abortions in Portugal. Now, by that time in Britain, there was about 6 women dying. following abortions. And we have 5 times the size of population in Britain than in Portugal. In Ireland, there was probably 1 or 2 women dying. Portugal had a population of 10 million in total, men and women. And I looked up the UN Demographic Yearbook, and the latest year for which figures were available in Portugal was, I think, 1972. And the number of women dying in their main childbearing years in Portugal in 1972 was 2,077. Now apparently 2,000 of them were dying from backstreet abortions and 77 from cancer, heart attacks, getting run over by a bus. I mean, in other words, it was pure fantasy, plucked out of thin air. Had no basis in reality at all. I wrote to the Times. My letter wasn't published, but a letter from a statistician from Gonville and Caius College in Cambridge was published, making the same point. But virtually nobody would have read that letter. Everyone would have, had this idea planted in their mind. The truth is that countries with strict laws against abortion have lower maternal death rates than countries which allow abortion widely. Ireland, where abortion is banned, has one of the best maternal health records in the world. Legalised abortion does nothing to improve medical care. According to the World Health Organization 2005 maternal mortality report, Ireland had the lowest maternal mortality rate, lifetime risk, and actual number of maternal deaths, 1 maternal death in the world. Lowest of any of the countries in Britain and Ireland. And as long ago as 1982, a number of leading obstetricians and gynecologists, including Professor John Bonner, a leading world scholar in obstetrics, stated that there are no medical circumstances whatsoever where it's necessary directly to terminate the life of an unborn child to save the life of the mother or to prevent serious injury to her health. That was then, and in the last few weeks, Professor John Bonner has signed a similar statement along with Professor Eamon O'Dwyer and other leading obstetricians and gynecologists, and hundreds of them are expected to sign up to this statement in the coming weeks. Under the Criminal Code of Malta, abortion is prohibited in all circumstances. Together with legislation that recognises the right to life of the unborn child, Malta also has a very low maternal mortality rate. For 2008, the recorded maternal mortality death rate was less than 2, with a lifetime risk of 1 in 9,200, among the lowest in the world. We're talking rates here. Ireland has had about 1/8 of the rate that obtains in England and Wales, where abortion is lawful, and about 1/11th or 1/12th of the rate in the United States. Chile, where abortion is illegal, has the lowest maternal mortality rate in the whole of South America. According to Dr. Elard Koch, an epidemiologist on the Faculty of Medicine at the University of Chile, Chile's promotion of safe pregnancy measures, such as accessibility of professional birth attendants in a hospital setting, is primarily responsible for the decrease in maternal mortality. The maternal mortality rate declined from 275 maternal deaths per 100,000 live births in 1960 to 18.7 deaths in 2000, the largest reduction in any Latin American country. Professor Robert Wally, a leading obstetrician and founder of Martha Care International, told a maternal mortality conference in London earlier this year that in the African countries in which I work, he said, 1 in 7 mothers will die due to a lack of medical equipment. He said it's ridiculous to supply women with abortions and condoms when they need access to emergency obstetrical care. Abortion is a sin of commission, but failing to provide women with obstetrical care is a sin of omission. And he said we're here to uphold women's dignity. And what about the tendency of the pro-abortion lobby to sweep under the carpet the ill effects of abortion, especially on women? People of Ireland need to study the hard facts in an objective way. Where psychological sequelae are concerned, denial of the available evidence and reluctance to investigate it are typical in societies where abortion is legalised. What we do know is this: a study into suicides after pregnancy in Finland, which appeared in the British Medical Journal, showed that suicide after birth was significantly lower than the mean annual suicide rate for women in the general population, being about half the mean rate. By way of contrast, the suicide rate associated with induced abortion was significantly higher than for women in the general population, being about 3 times the rate. According to Dr. Greg Pike, the Director of Southern Cross Bioethics in Adelaide, South Australia, he said the highly complex psychology of abortion has been examined by hundreds of researchers over previous decades, with a diversity of methodologies and interpretations. In precise scientific terms, the question of causality cannot be answered definitively, as it is not possible to conduct a randomised controlled trial assigning some women to an abortion group and others to a birth group. Therefore, most studies examine the association between abortion and mental health. Reviews of the field have arrived, he said, at disparate conclusions. Aside from psychological conditions, numerous studies have identified emotional distress immediately following abortion and in the months following. Women experience a range of emotion after abortion, including sadness, loneliness, shame, guilt, grief, doubt and regret. However, some studies also identify positive reactions like relief, happiness and satisfaction. In the longer term, women exhibited cognitive dissonance, describing their abortions of 10 years or more ago in terms of negative emotions, yet believing the correct choice was made. For anyone interested, I have all the scientific data and references for what I'm saying at this point in the talk, and indeed throughout the whole talk. Specific strategies of avoidance were used to cope. Among US college students, women who'd had an abortion and men whose partners had had an abortion, 1/3 of women and 1/3 of men were uncomfortable and expressed regret about the abortion decision. 1/3 of men and women also expressed a sense of longing for the aborted fetus. More often, they often used terms like child and baby to describe their loss. Results from a 2006 New Zealand study in the Journal of Child Psychology and Psychiatry on mental health and abortion confirmed other work showing a link between the two. The New Zealand study revealed that 42% of women who had an abortion experienced major depression in the 4 years prior to the interview. This is nearly twice the rate of women who'd never been pregnant and 35% higher than those who continued their pregnancy. This study also showed that abortion increased the incidence of the risk of anxiety disorders. The same research team undertook a more detailed follow-up study, correcting carefully for possible confounders, in which their earlier findings were confirmed. In a more recent study, they concluded that women who had abortions experience mental health disorders, 30% more often compared to women who'd not had an abortion. The authors went further to suggest that there were good grounds for causality, but more work needs to be done before strong, definitive statements about abortion causing mental health disorders can be made. Another more recent paper from this group showed that the extent to which women reported an adverse reaction to abortion correlated with the extent of mental health disorders. Other researchers have also found a link between abortion and depression, although some groups have not been able to confirm this. Now, I've sought in this paper to give you a brief and impartial view of the literature based on the excellent work done by Dr. Greg Pike. But there's no more eloquent witness than the many women coming forward now who are speaking out on street corners and at public meetings about their abortion and about their regret for abortion. And it's interesting that from time to time in the popular press in Britain, you'll have fairly hard-bitten journalists who talk about their abortions, and they too almost invariably talk about their baby, their sense of loss. Now, they will usually say that they made the right decision, so that, you know, I'm not wanting to misrepresent what these ladies are saying, but it's interesting how the word baby and sense of loss is repeatedly described. Sadly, the melancholy fact of the matter is that many pro-abortion activists and advocates characteristically deny the objective findings of science, with the consequent denial that the unborn are human beings with rights to be protected. Others accept the science, but wish to impose on the unborn their personal theory about personhood in order to exclude them from moral consideration. Moreover, there is a tendency amongst abortion advocates to invent data and even to appeal to the base human instinct to want to destroy another human being whose life they consider is not worthy to be lived. And to achieve their goal, supporters of abortion seek to scare the community by reference to children with disabilities, depicting them as having lives not worthy to be lived and constituting an unacceptable burden on parents themselves and on society as a whole. Can you imagine a friend of mine who has about the most serious form of spina bifida that a person can have? A lady called Alison Davis. Just Google for Alison Davis tonight and spina bifida. You'll find plenty of eloquent words of her own about her situation. How do you think she feels that 95% of babies who are detected with her condition are aborted? Now, of course, parents of children with disabilities should not be abandoned by the society and left to fend for themselves. The morally right response of Parliament is not to provide for the violation of an unborn child's right to life, but to provide all such reasonable assistance as those families need or to take care of a child with disabilities. The British Government 2005 report, to which I referred earlier, the one that was produced in the light of an anti-abortion bill before Parliament a few years ago, adopts a strictly cost-effective view of aborting disabled children, quite definitely regarding them as a financial burden. I quote, "The extra cost to care for disabled children, if the Abortion Act is affected by the legislation, is estimated at £5 million. Suspected disability," the government report says, "represents 1% of all abortions, 1,900 recorded under the Abortion Act. However, social costs vary widely, they say, depending on the severity and nature of the disability and the lifespan of the people involved. Discussions with medical experts," the government report says, indicate that up to 20% would die shortly after birth or within a year or so. 40% would suffer moderate disabilities and 40% would suffer severe disabilities. It's difficult, the report says, to establish accurate estimates to care for these disabled children. However, an approximate estimate of the additional cost, excluding normal living costs, to care for 240 severely disabled children is likely to be in the order of £4 million per year, and it's assumed that the extra cost to care for 240 moderately disabled children will be about a quarter of the cost. These words from the British government speak for themselves about the attitude towards a disabled child. Elected officials don't have the right to invent new rights, let alone enshrine in law the systematic violation of fundamental human rights. No parliament has the moral right to pass laws which would violate the fundamental human rights of any member of the human family. Put another way, it's simply beyond their authority to legalise abortion, thereby destroying the right to life of the unborn. Politicians exceed their moral and political authority whenever they entrench in law such a fundamental and unjust discrimination against some members of the human family. It's required of parliaments to recognise and defend fundamental human rights and not to destroy them. Politicians don't grant fundamental human rights, they recognise them as a given. They cannot therefore deprive people of their inherent dignity and right to life. Politicians are obligated to make laws for the good order of a society, protecting the weak and the vulnerable from unjust treatment by the stronger and more powerful. Politicians and political parties that promote abortion lose all moral authority. Politicians are obligated to provide properly for women and their children, and especially for pregnant women, who, according to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, motherhood and childhood are entitled to special care and assistance. Even if the whole world agrees to a violation of human rights, for example slavery or racism, Ireland should accept no pressure to keep up with the international Joneses when the Joneses advocate and carry out the killing of the innocents with a concomitant violation of the moral, psychological and spiritual integrity of women. The inherent dignity of the human being and the right to life which flows from that is universally recognised. No society has the right to deny it to any group in the human community. Politicians often present themselves as the enlightened ones where the promotion of moral evil is concerned. It's time to look more carefully at the kind of people being put forward by political parties as favoured candidates and have them replaced with people of moral integrity, perception and commitment to fundamental human rights. Ireland needs to look at the social, legal and political consequences of legal abortion which have occurred in other countries which have gone down that path. What Ireland will find if abortion is legalised is the rapid increase in the number of abortions which will inevitably flow. What Ireland will find if abortion is legalised is the violation of the consciences of members of the medical profession who do not wish to be involved in the killings of the unborn. Interestingly, Dr. Monaghan at the Maternal Mortality Conference